24. Your voice, your vote. Tonight's debate is brought to you by 6ABC in partnership with Univision 65. Live from 6ABC Studios, our candidates in alphabetical order: Democrat Bob Casey and Republican Dave McCormick. Our moderators for this evening: Univision anchor Ilya Garcia and 6ABC anchors Shari Williams and Matt O'Donnell.
Good evening and welcome to this debate between the Democratic and Republican candidates for Pennsylvania's U.S. Senate seat. I'm Matt O'Donnell. Incumbent Senator Bob Casey is seeking his fourth term. He is being challenged by combat veteran and former CEO Dave McCormick.
And I'm Shari Williams. Pennsylvania's one of 34 Senate seats that will be decided in this November's election. This race is one of a handful in the country, which could ultimately determine the balance of power in the chamber. Over the next hour, the candidates will be answering questions posed by myself, Matt, and our co-moderator, Ilya Garcia from Univision 65.
Great to be with both of you. Now, under the debate rules, each candidate will get a question and 1 minute to answer, followed by a round of rebuttals. By prior draw, the first question will go to Senator Casey, so let us begin with the economy. Senator Casey, you claim corporations caused inflation by engaging in greedflation and shrinkflation, but prices are high everywhere. When you buy gas, when you go to put in a bid for a townhouse, when you go to buy bananas. How likely is it that companies across a variety of industries all conspire to make things more expensive for everyone? And what other factors may have been involved in causing inflation?
Well, Matt, thank you, and I want to thank all those who are here in 6ABC for hosting this debate. Look, across the country, especially in the last several years, prices have been way up. The cost of food, the cost of household items have skyrocketed. You have corporations in the 2-year period from the middle of 2020 to the middle of 2022, corporate profits going up 75%, 5 times the rate of inflation. So corporations were engaged in price gouging, taking advantage of the pandemic and the inflationary pressures. And I think we should do something about it. We should point it out like I have, issue reports on it. Secondly, we should pass price gouging legislation to hold companies accountable. And thirdly, we should roll back those big corporate tax breaks they got a couple years ago. The difference in this race is I want to go after price gouging. My opponent won't do it. He doesn't think we should do anything about price gouging. In fact, he excuses big corporations ripping off families. I think we should hold them accountable.
I'd like to hear about other causes, but let me ask you a question, Mr. McCormick. Staying on the economy, of course. You believe excessive federal spending under the Biden administration is the main driver of inflation. The Trump administration set a record in 2020 for having the largest budget deficit in American history at $3.132 trillion. How much responsibility does former President Trump have when it comes to these higher prices?
Well, thank you to 6ABC, and thank you for your moderating the debate tonight. Listen, this is a very clear and stark choice. Senator Casey, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris said that all this $5 trillion of new spending would not drive inflation. Larry Summers, a Democrat economist that served as Obama's Treasury Secretary, said, no, if you spend $5 trillion, which is what they spent, of new money, it's going to drive up prices. That, plus a war on fossil fuels, has driven up fuel prices. So groceries are up 22%, rent 22%, electricity 35%, fuel 50% under the Biden-Harris-Casey plan. So I'm not saying that there isn't some company that could be potentially be price gouging. The problem is that this is caused by bad policy. And Senator Casey has been a 99% vote for all these excessive spending policies. And the one thing we learned in the Army, day one, is you got to take responsibility for your actions. He's not taking responsibility for his actions. These votes were obviously going to drive this inflation problem. It's killing working families, and we need to change.
You talk a lot about price gouging. What about other causes, Senator Casey?
Matt, there's no question that when you have the kind of skyrocketing prices, again, corporate profits up 75%, there are a number of causes. But the Federal Reserve told us in that time period from the middle of 20 to the middle of 2022, corporate profits caused 41% of all the inflation in America. I think we should do something about that, hold them accountable. We should also help families provide a middle-class tax cut, not a tax cut for big corporations and billionaires, and we should help families with a child tax credit to offset those costs that families incur.
Mr. McCormick, you know that there's a lot of lag time when it comes to the economy. So the culpability of the Trump administration and the huge budget deficits.
Well, the difference between what President Trump did and what Biden and Harris did is they think that the government is better spending your money than you are. The tax cuts give middle-class families, a family of $50,000, $2,500 in tax breaks. So what Senator Casey wants to do when he says he wants to get rid of the Trump tax cuts, he wants to raise taxes on working families in Pennsylvania. On top of that, he's supporting lifting the SALT tax gap, which essentially gives tax breaks to rich people in California and rich people in New York. So that's the kind of policy that they're advocating, which is going to take our country over the cliff. It already is. We're in dire fiscal
Senator Casey, you want to rebuttal?
I get 20 seconds?
20 seconds, yes.
20 seconds. Look, the difference between us in this race is he wants to double down on that huge corporate tax break from 2017. He wants to give the billionaires, the people making hundreds of millions, and the big corporations another big tax cut. That tax cut for the most powerful companies in the world is going to add up to more than $4 trillion. It'll explode the debt. It makes no sense to do that. We should give the middle class a tax cut.
Say two things. First of all, $5 trillion of new spending under Biden, Harris, Casey. $2 trillion more of new spending under Kamala Harris under her new proposals. But you know what else they want to do? They want to have Venezuelan-like price controls. This legislation, what it's saying is the government should decide. This is socialism. This has been tried in America, in Venezuela, around the world. Socialist price controls don't work.
McCormick.
They're going to destroy our economy. They don't understand the economy.
We're going to move now, gentlemen, to the next topic, and this is in the issue of reproductive rights. Mr. McCormick, we will begin with you. You called the overturning of Roe v. Wade a huge victory for the protection of life. You've also stated that decisions on abortion should be left to the states, allowing each to set its own laws. A woman is a woman no matter where she lives. So what is your reasoning for supporting a system where a woman's access to abortion is dependent on her state of residence?
Well, this is obviously a very polarizing issue. I'm a father of 6 daughters, and I believe that it's so polarizing that courts shouldn't decide, judges shouldn't decide, people should decide. And there's very different views across states. So I believe it's a states' rights issue. Pennsylvania has a law. Republicans and Democrats alike have supported it. It was signed into law by Senator Casey's father, Governor Casey. I also support the 3 exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. And I would not support any national legislation or any national ban. And Senator Casey's the extremist on this. Senator Casey has voted for legislation that allows abortion up to the end of the 3rd trimester and federal funding for it. I think that the people should decide this. It's a very tough issue. We should talk about other aspects of reproductive rights. I also think that the government should get very involved in helping families have children with fertility treatment and IVF. I've taken a real leadership role in that. As a CEO, I gave every employee IVF treatment. The company reimbursed them 100%. I think the government should give a $15,000 tax credit for IVF. So we need to talk more expansively about reproductive rights, and I think the people respectfully need to decide.
My question for that and a follow-up, a woman in Ohio, is she any different from a woman in Pennsylvania, leaving it to the states?
Yeah, well, I think when you say states, you mean people. So people get to decide. People get to elect officials that represent their views. So you can't have it both ways. You can't say that we want to have it to be a state's rights, and then when the state does something you don't like, it's not your personal beliefs. So I do think the people should decide, and that's what's happened in Pennsylvania. I think that Pennsylvania's got a law that people believe in, support, and I support that as well.
Mr. McCormick, thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Casey, you've described yourself as a pro-life Democrat for many years, but more recently, you've taken a stronger stance in favor of abortion rights, particularly after the Dobbs decision. Can you explain to voters what prompted the shift in your stance?
Sherry, in 2022, the Supreme Court overturned a 49-year right in the Dobbs case. When they overturned that right, that was overturning Roe v. Wade. And we had a very clear choice at that moment. Whether you're a citizen or a member of the United States Senate or a legislator of any kind, you had to make a decision. Do you want those rights restored or not? It's ban abortion or not ban abortion. That was the choice before the country. And I voted at that moment to restore those rights through the Women's Health Protection Act. When that decision was handed down by the Supreme Court, Mr. McCormick said that decision made him, quote, very, very happy. And his views and his position is in furtherance of what he said. He does not support restoring Roe. He doesn't support the vehicle to do that, the only vehicle right now, which is the Women's Health Protection Act, and it's a big difference in this race. The other thing I would also add is that he doesn't support the IVF bill before the Senate or the bill to make sure we have the opportunity to have birth control as a right.
You're going to hear a lot of career politician talk tonight. This is the perfect example. There is no senator in the United States Senate who has flip-flopped more on this issue than Senator Casey. Senator Casey, previously as a senator, said that he wanted to overturn Roe v. Wade. Senator Casey said that there should be only one exception, life of the mother. Senator Casey was one of the most pro-life senators in the Senate. And he has now moved his position, flip-flopped his position. I don't know how when someone flip-flops on this position if they held it so strongly then and don't hold it now. So there's no one who has less credibility on this issue than Senator Casey. And he's essentially going where the wind goes. He's been weak on this and so many issues where his party has shifted to the left. He has shifted with them, and you're going to hear that as a theme tonight.
Senator Casey, would you like a rebuttal?
Yes, Sherry, I think most Americans believe that our daughters shouldn't have fewer rights than their mothers or their grandmothers. And we're at a point now where the country is going to make a choice in terms of this Senate race, in terms of control of the Senate, and that will largely determine whether or not those rights are restored or not. I've already voted twice to restore those rights. My opponent won't support that.
And may I just do 10 seconds?
We have to turn on to the issue of immigration. The first question will be for you, Senator Casey. Senator Casey, the last comprehensive immigration reform was enacted almost 4 decades ago. As a journalist who serves the Hispanic community in our area, I get to hear some of the community's frustrations regarding immigration reform. Some feel that the issue is just a political football that is only given attention to during election time to court the Latino vote. What action steps or legislative measures would you take to ensure Congress gets closer to passing an immigration reform bill this time?
Yeah, Ilya, the first thing we should do, and I hope we could do it before a new Congress, but I don't think it'll happen, probably in a new Congress, a new president. First thing we should do is pass the bipartisan border security bill that's before the Senate right now. I think that it's possible that in a new year, a new Congress, that we can get Republicans to work with us on this because most of them already agreed to support it, or a lot of them did at least. And I've already voted for that bill twice. The reason I say that is because border security is critically important, number one. We have to secure our border. That means hiring more Border Patrol. That means investing a lot more in the technology that will stop fentanyl at the border. And that means giving the president new authority to shut down the border and reduce the number of people coming across our border, fixing our asylum system. I think if we do that, it not only will help us secure the border, but it will also give credibility back to get to other reforms. My opponent opposes that bill for only one reason. The leader of his party told him he couldn't support it for political reasons. He should stand up, show some guts, oppose the leader of his party, and support this bill.
Mr. McCormick, we are seeing an alarming rise on anti-immigrant rhetoric, with President Trump demonizing migrants while the immigration policy proposals stall in Congress. Latino activists and political leaders worry that increasingly inflammatory and racist rhetoric about immigrants is fueling a surge in the already record-breaking number of hate crimes against Latinos. If you were elected, what would you do specifically to protect immigrant families?
Well, I'm married to an immigrant, so I'm certainly very pro-legal immigrant. We are a country of immigrants. We're also a country of laws. And under Biden, Harris, and Casey, I mean, this is another career politician, election year epiphany from Punxsutawney Bob, who comes up every 6 months before every election. I mean, under 3.5 years of the Biden-Harris administration, there was nothing done on the border. It was an absolute disaster. 10 million illegal immigrants, people on the terrorist watch list. The fentanyl crisis has grown. I've got Sheriff Ott here is a good friend of mine who lost a son to the wide open borders that resulted under the weakness and the failure of Casey, Biden, and Harris. And this fentanyl crisis is going absolutely crazy. We've got to secure the border. Senator Casey just did a commercial where he was standing in front of the wall, the very wall that he derided and said we didn't need a wall when President Trump came into office. That's absolute chutzpah. That is a career politician in action. We need to secure the border. We need to go after the cartels with military. We need to treat them as the terrorist threat they are. And of course, we need to embrace the fact that we're a country of immigrants. We can't tolerate hate, but we also can't tolerate a wide open border that's damaging the security of Americans.
Thank you, Mr. McCormick.
Thank you.
Let's move on to you would like a rebuttal, Senator Casey. Go ahead.
Number one is you didn't hear any response to your question about the language that some have used. The worst thing we can do is have politicians spend time demonizing immigrants. We got to solve this problem. The beginning of solving this problem is passing that bipartisan bill. The big difference in this race is not just that I voted twice for this bill, and he's opposed to it, and the reason he's opposed because the leader of his party, but he's also the candidate in this race when he was a hedge fund CEO who invested millions of dollars in the largest producer of fentanyl in China.
Thank you, Senator
and Chinese
Casey.
fentanyls come to our country.
Would you like to respond?
Listen, we have a wide open border that lays at their feet. He doesn't address that. The border bill that was proposed was an amnesty bill. It wasn't a border bill. It didn't truly secure the border. He's voted against a border wall. He's voted for sanctuary cities. They are trying to change the conversation because they have failed to secure our border. In terms of hate crimes, if the senator is so worried about spewing of hatred, then he should unendorse Summer Lee, who is not anti-immigrant hate, it's anti-Semitism. And so Bob Casey's standing up there saying he's the moral voice. This isn't a moral voice. This is a guy who hasn't had the courage to stand up against his own party and an avowed anti-Semite.
Thank you.
Do I get 20 seconds?
Yes. Yes.
20 seconds. I'll go back to your question. What do we do about border security and immigration more broadly? The bill that I've voted for twice now, bipartisan bill, the strongest, toughest border bill in 25 years, is endorsed by the Border Patrol Union, which actually just endorsed President Trump recently. So they're not a Democratic organization. They support that bill. He doesn't.
You have 20 seconds.
All I will say is if you look at that border bill, which I have done, I made up my own mind, unlike Senator Casey, who's a 99% vote. If you look at that border bill, it is the most liberal border bill in the world of any industrialized country. It would allow up to 5,000 applications per day. This is millions of people coming into the economy. It's completely subverting what's intended by asylum, and it would risk our security. I made my own decision, unlike Senator Casey. Thank you.
Gentlemen, we'd like to talk about bipartisanship and civility in politics. Mr. McCormick, you seek to become a member of the 2025 freshman class in Washington. To many voters, the newer congressional members seem more interested in gaining new social media followers and more cable TV appearances, and less interested in passing bills and speaking to colleagues on the other side. How, as a new senator, might you be different?
Here's the America I know. As a platoon leader in the 82nd Airborne Division, in my platoon, I had a young man from rural Alabama. I had an African-American man from Newark. I had a platoon sergeant from Puerto Rico who was 35 and seemed ancient at the time. I never remember talking about religion. I never remember talking about politics or party. We were just Americans in search of protecting one another and protecting our great country. That's my spirit. That's how I come into this. I'm a problem solver. I want to solve problems. I'm a conservative. If you go to my website, more than any other candidate in the country, certainly more than Senator Casey, you will see what I'm for, what I believe in. But as a CEO and as a leader, you've got to find ways to compromise to get things done. I'm someone who will get things done. Senator Casey, in 18 years in the Senate, 30 years in elected office, does not have a record he can run on, which is why he's devoted himself to attacking me. So if you want to talk about civility, we got to get through this election, get a new senator in Pennsylvania that can actually work across the aisle and get things done. Senator Casey has not proven himself to be such a senator.
Senator Casey, you hear this. Americans say time and time again they are fed up with the incivility, the lack of bipartisanship in Washington. What have you done in your first 3 terms to take the temperature down and cross the line and work with Republicans?
Matt, in order to get something done in the United States Senate, you have to work in a bipartisan way, and that's what I've done. In the period of the last Congress, 21 and 22, I wrote and passed more bills than almost anybody in the whole Senate. Part of that work stretches not just through this recent time period, but going back even further. Women on college campuses are safer today from sexual assault because of my bill that I passed. Children who have a disability, Families are permitted now under the tax law to save for that disability in a tax-advantaged way, just like you save for college, because of my legislation. Because of my work, we invested in infrastructure in Pennsylvania like we've never done before. Rural areas in Pennsylvania, small rural counties, frankly, Republican counties, like Fulton County and Bedford County, among the most Republican counties in the state, have investments in their schools, about 17 or 18 million just in those two counties, investments in high-speed internet so kids can learn more and earn more when they get older. I've got a strong bipartisan
Mr. McCormick, you
record.
get a chance to rebuttal.
Listen, Senator Casey famously on the debate stage with Rick Santorum said, listen, anytime you have two politicians that vote 99% of the time the same way, you need to get rid of one. He was speaking of Senator Santorum and George Bush. This senator votes 98.6% of the time with Biden-Harris. He is not an independent voice. With all his talk about moral courage and being independent, he has voted in lockstep with his liberal party to defund the police, to not secure the border, to support biological men competing in women's sports. This is a guy who's gone off track with the values of Pennsylvania.
Casey.
These are not Pennsylvania values or policies, and they've hurt our great Commonwealth.
Look, so a lot of the work that I did on the infrastructure bill is helping every one of our 67 counties, including here in Philly. That bill was bipartisan. He wants to repeal it. When I was a deciding vote to make sure that we had a cap on insulin and a cap on out-of-pocket costs for seniors, their drug costs, that'll go into effect in January, 829,000 Pennsylvanians will benefit from that. He wants to repeal that bill that capped insulin and capped out-of-pocket costs. So who's more bipartisan? And if he's going to talk about his record versus my record, his record is a hedge fund CEO investing in China and our adversaries. That's his record. Mine is bipartisan work in the Senate.
Real quick, 20 seconds. Let's say both of you were the senators of Pennsylvania. How would you work with each other? 20 seconds each.
Well, we'd have to find common ground. Right now, I don't see much with Senator Casey. I think he is increasingly, listen, Bob Casey went to the Senate to change Washington. Washington changed Bob Casey. He is completely out of step with the values and views of Pennsylvanians. He's voted for a series of things that have made our Commonwealth much worse. So I think he needs to be replaced. And that's why I'm running, because I think career politicians like Bob Casey are really hurting our great country.
I think there's plenty of things we could work together on. It should start with things that are bipartisan right now. The bipartisan border deal, supported by the Border Patrol Union. I don't know why he wouldn't support that. It doesn't make any sense. When he knows that we could advance the ball based upon the expertise of the Border Patrol. But while I was doing that bipartisan work in Pennsylvania, he was investing in our adversaries, investing in China and investing in Russia.
Let's move on to the next topic.
Next topic,
please.
We're going to move now to the rising tensions in the Middle East. And Senator Casey, we'll start this question with you, sir. The Middle East is on edge for a potential escalation in the region, with Israel promising a retaliatory attack on Iran, and Iran now warning the U.S. it too will retaliate. Researchers at Harvard estimate the U.S. has provided nearly $18 billion to Israel since the festival attack October 7th, 2023. How do you believe the U.S. can continue to support Israel's right to self-defense while also addressing the humanitarian needs of Palestinian civilians and other civilians as this conflict spreads? You have a minute, sir.
Yeah, we have to start with October the 7th, 2023, when a terrorist organization, Hamas, invaded Israel, murdered 1,200 innocent Israelis, and in addition to murdering all those Israelis, raped women and took hostages. That threat to the people of Israel has to be defeated. It's been badly undermined so far, but it is still a threat. Hezbollah is a threat to Israel. The Iranian regime is a threat to Israel. The Houthis, so many extremist organizations in that region. We've got to continue to support Israel's efforts, not just to defend itself, but to take the fight to those terrorists that are threatening them every single day. And I'll continue to support Israel as I always have. But a big difference in this race is, while I was doing that, supporting Israel all these years, my opponent was running that hedge fund in Connecticut, the largest hedge fund in the world. I mentioned the investments in China and Russia. He also invested in a Chinese arms manufacturer that had ties to Iran, and those weapons that they produced made their way to Hamas. That is disqualifying.
Senator, the portion of this question of also addressing the humanitarian needs of the Palestinian civilians and the other civilians. 20 seconds, sir, on that follow-up, please.
You're right, and I should have added that. We have to continue to support robust support for food for people in Gaza. medicine and medical supplies. Our government's done that. The Israelis have done it. We've got to do more. So do the Israelis, and so do countries in the region. I want to have the Arab countries finally stand up and help the people of Gaza instead of just pointing a finger at the United States and Israel.
Mr. McCormick, same topic here. You said that the U.S. needs to show strength and provide Israel with what it needs to finish the job. President Joe Biden has warned Israel not to strike Iran's oil fields as it could lead to further unrest. Do you believe Israel needs to show restraint in its retaliation on Iran? And how do you address the tens of thousands of civilians who are also caught in the middle of this?
First of all, Senator Casey has lied throughout this about my record. Go to bobcaseylies.com, caseylies.com. But I just want to say, I'm not going to take any preaching as a guy who went to West Point, went to Ranger School, was the honor graduate, went to the 82nd Airborne Division, went into Iraq in the first wave when they looked like there would be tens of thousands of casualties. I'm not going to take any preaching from a guy who spent 30 years in public office and hadn't got much done. So I'm not going to take any preaching from you, Bob Casey, on that. And your lies, which are completely unworthy of you and your family and your service. So listen, what's happening in the Middle East comes from weakness. And we are being tested from our adversaries around the world. President Biden should support Israel completely. Israel is in the fight for its life. It's being attacked by Hezbollah. It's being attacked by Hamas. It's being attacked by Iran. The original sin is the Iran deal where Senator Casey was the deciding vote in 2015. It gave them $100 billion, which they have used to underwrite terrorist proxies. That's the root cause of this problem, and that's what needs to be addressed. We need to strangle Iran and its ability to support these terrorists.
Mr. McCormick, the question, if you could, in regards to Israel showing restraint. Should it show restraint in its response to Iran, especially in light of the thousands of civilians who have also been caught in this conflict?
Israel's in the best position to manage and make these trade-offs. America shouldn't preach to Israel. I went to Israel with my wife right after October 7th in early January. We saw the IDF. We saw the care they're taking to reduce civilian casualties. You want to blame anybody for civilian deaths? Blame Hamas that's hiding in hospitals. Blame Hezbollah that's located its missiles right around civilian populations where people are going to be killed. No, there's not two sides to this story. There's one side of the story. There's pure evil that needs to be eradicated, and it's threatening Israel's very existence. We also need to fight anti-Semitism at home. Senator Casey's been a weak voice on this. This is a true front battle, and we need strength and moral clarity on both fronts.
You both get 30 seconds rebuttal. Senator Casey, your rebuttal first, sir.
I agree with part of the end of that answer about this should be Israel's determination about its own security interests and what Israel has to do to defend itself from terrorism. But look, when Mr. McCormick said I was preaching, he's just preaching at me. He mentioned his service. It's commendable service to the people of our country. But this isn't a race about his service or what we were doing at that age in our life. It's about my work in the United States Senate and his work as a hedge fund CEO. And he doesn't like the fact that I talk about his record as a hedge fund CEO. When I talked about those dollars going from a Chinese weapons manufacturer through the Iranians into Hamas, that's part of his record. That's what I'm putting on the table. I'm not preaching. I'm stating a fact.
30 seconds to rebut, sir.
It's great to talk about records. So I ran a great investment firm. It invested around the world, as many investment firms do. It had exposure to China. All the investments that were made were approved by the U.S. government. But the richness of a career politician. Bob Casey, as the treasurer of Pennsylvania, approved using Bridgewater, which was the firm I worked with and for, before I ever got there. All these investments that were happening under Bob Casey as treasurer. Moreover, Bob Casey has invested $31 trillion as the treasurer in China Mobile, which had close ties. He takes lobbying money from firms that are selling drones into the Chinese military PLA. So this is not a guy that actually has much credibility on China.
Senator Casey has a 20-second. You're asking for a 20-second rebuttal.
He said in 2023 that all the decisions that were made while he was CEO, he has responsibility for. And what he doesn't want to take ownership of or responsibility for are the decisions he made as a CEO to invest in China, to invest in the rise of China after we knew that China was causing a lot of job loss here in the United States. He invested in helped Vladimir Putin just before he invaded Ukraine. And finally, if he's going to talk about anti-Semitism, I have the leading bill in the United States Senate to combat anti-Semitism. Number one, you shouldn't laugh about that. Number two is He's the one who invested not hedge fund money, his own personal money, millions of his own personal money in a website that platforms hate, Holocaust denial, and anti-Semitism.
Thank you,
That's
Senator
his money.
Davis. This is the
career politician again. His anti-Semitism bill, which I support, that was something we could agree on. He and Chuck Schumer don't have the courage to actually bring it to the floor for a vote because they don't want to alienate those radical people in their party that truly are anti-Semitic. Just like Summer Lee. Summer Lee, who's an avowed anti-Semite. Bob Casey just said that what her statement wasn't a good statement, but he actually stands by his endorsement. So this is the world we're in, where you say one thing as a career politician and your actions are another. That's the problem with Bob Casey, and that's why we need to get rid of him.
Thank you.
Do I get 20 seconds?
We're about halfway through.
Okay.
Thank you.
We're going to take a breath. And now we got to plow through. We have more topics for you. We're going to turn to you for this one, Mr. McCormick. It's about election integrity and misinformation. Pennsylvania, as you know, has the third most people arrested for the January 6th insurrection. Many of them remain convinced the 2020 election was stolen, even though a whole host of judges and Republicans say it was not. If you could, what would you tell those Pennsylvanians who remain jailed for January 6th charges?
Well, listen, I had said that I thought President Biden won the 2020 election, and I had also said that those who, many, hundreds of thousands of people were peaceful protesters on January 6th, but those who conducted violence in our capital, I think, should be held accountable to the rules of justice, just like those people destroying storefronts and public property and violence on the streets of Minneapolis should be prosecuted. I think that was what should happen, and our judicial system should allow for that. In terms of election integrity, listen, I mean, I think we got a real problem in our country in that Senator Casey and the Democrats in general don't support the most basic fundamental thing, which is voter ID. And that's something that I'd fight for. Day one in the Senate, we need to have you need to have a voter ID, an ID to get on an airplane. You need to have an ID to cash a check. The Democrats and Senator Casey thinks you don't need voter ID, and that would be the one way to give everybody confidence that our elections have high integrity.
Let me direct that question to you, Senator Casey. Given Mr. McCormick's position, and though the incidence of illegal voting is very small in elections, plenty of voters do remain concerned about election integrity. Given we already have ID requirements to drive a car, purchase alcohol, fly in an airplane, why shouldn't people be expected to prove they are who they are when they vote?
Yeah, nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. A lot of those issues are determined state by state, and that's what the General Assembly here in Pennsylvania will debate. But look, what he left out of his answer are some of the people he hired. He's hired fake electors in his campaign. He hired fake electors to run a PAC, and he's been hanging around with insurrectionists. So he's never really condemned those who brought about that awful, awful insult to the Constitution and to our country on January the 6th, because he doesn't want to take them on and offend them. We've got to make sure that that never, ever happens again. One of the ways we can do that is don't spread lies and conspiracies about the election. Tell the truth about what happened. Tell the truth, and don't intimidate these county election workers. For the first time in American history, county election workers, these people who give their lives to count votes and do it with integrity, they've had death threats, and they're under a constant threat because of the conspiracy theories that he won't condemn.
Would you like to respond to that, Mr. McCormick?
I don't know what he's talking about, but my views on this have been clear from 2020 on. I've been a strong voice of moral clarity on all these issues, but I'm glad he raised the question of lying, because today was a great day in the sense that the Washington Post wrote an article about an ad that Senator Casey has just run, saying that I had said that I wanted to reduce Social Security and Medicare benefits, which was a 100% fabrication, as said by the Washington Post. Bob Casey, in his own words, looks at the camera and says a complete and utter lie. So if you want to talk about honesty and truthfulness in politics, Senator Casey, you got a lot of work to do looking at your ads, because there's a lot of lies. You can go back to the
topic, or I'm sure you'd like to respond to Mr. McCormick, Senator Casey.
Do I have 20 seconds?
Yes.
Okay. Look.
Actually, you get 30.
The campaign that we're in today started with this candidate, Mr. McCormick, starting the race, lying to the people of Pennsylvania about where he lives. How do you lie about where you live when you're running for an office where you seek to represent the people of our state? He said he was living in Pennsylvania. He wasn't. He was living in Connecticut. The Associated Press wrote about it, August the 14th, 2023. He lied to the people about that. He also lied about how he grew up. He said at one point he was a farmer and that he grew up on a farm. And then he started lying about other things in this campaign. But if this is a question about who's been telling a lie, how do you lie to the people about where you live?
Mr. McCormick, you get 20 seconds.
Listen, you know, duty on our country is what I learned at West Point, is how I've conducted my life. Senator Casey's lies are abundantly clear on CaseyLies.com, and they're fact-checked by PolitiFact and the Washington Post and Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. He is running the dirtiest, most inaccurate campaign in modern history in Pennsylvania, and it's because it's because he doesn't have a track record to run on.
Senator Casey,
that's been his campaign.
Look, he's trying to, and we'll go back to his allegation about Social Security and Medicare. He's trying to deny that he was part of an administration, the Bush administration, that tried to foist upon the country private accounts, investing precious Social Security resources in the stock market, and having big Wall Street firms manage that money and make a lot of money off of it.
Thank you, gentlemen.
That's called privatization. He was for it.
Our next topic is border security. Both of you have touched on this, but let's get a direct question. Senator Casey, you're first. You are on record supporting the bipartisan border security bill, which called for more hiring of Border Patrol agents, also empowered administrations to be able to close the border. With persistent issues like drug trafficking, including the fentanyl, and record number of migrants seeking asylum, what has taken Democrats so long to prioritize this issue?
Well, I've been working on this issue for years. I started voting on legislation to direct more dollars to the detection of fentanyl years ago, and I voted 25 times to secure the border, including twice by voting for that bill this year. The bill that I support is supported by the Border Patrol Union. It would allow us to hire thousands more Border Patrol. It would change the asylum rules, making that bar for seeking asylum a lot higher. A lot fewer people would cross the border because of that, and that's why Republicans and Democrats supported it. It was on its way to passage until the leader of the Republican Party said, don't pass it because it'll help the other side politically, and Mr. McCormick fell right in line with that, kind of like a lapdog lapping the shoes of the Republican nominee. We should pass that bill because it'll restore confidence in the American people that we can detect fentanyl at the border, mostly coming in through vehicles crossing our border, and it would also help us with more Border Patrol and a much tougher approach to the border.
Senator Casey, thank you. Mr. McCormick, Senate Republicans backed out of that bipartisan border security bill earlier this year, with Republicans often emphasizing the need for a stronger response at the border. How do you explain to voters the resistance to advancing legislation that addresses the very issue?
Well, as I said before, it was bad legislation. There was good legislation, H.R. 2 in the House, that would strengthened our border. I've been to the border twice in the last couple of years. I've talked to the Border Patrol. Senator Casey, I've been there more times than Senator Casey and the borders are. And when you get there, you see that the wall stops under Biden, Harris, and Casey. People are walking across in the middle of the night. In my particular night that I was there at 2 in the morning, 5 military-age men from Syria and 5 Chinese nationals. This has become a national security crisis of epic proportion. 200 people last year on the terrorist watch list. We just saw recently with a memo leaked from ICE that 25,000 convicted murderers and convicted rapists were knowingly allowed in the country. This isn't speculation. This was in an official document from the Department of Homeland Security. That's all happened under his watch. The bill that they proposed didn't address that. It would have sanctioned 2 million illegal immigrants coming into our country for asylum. And we've got a major problem. We need to go after these cartels, treat them as the terrorist threat they are, use our military selectively. This has been like a frog in boiling water. Senator Casey has done that. He says he's been working on it for years. How effective has that work been? We've got a crisis that's destroying our country.
Seconds to rebut, and I'm going to allow Senator Casey your rebuttal first.
The original part of your question was about when these changes went into effect by the administration, and you make a good point. They should have done this a long time ago. No question about that. But my point is on this is that we're seeing the results. When the administration acted with the limited authority they have, they're reducing border crossings by about 50%. They're way down. That is proof positive. It's a testament to why this bill is so important. The authority in this bill is authority that President Trump asked for and did not get, and authority that President Biden has asked for and did not get. We should give the president full authority to shut down the border when crossings get too high, to change the asylum rules, to have more money for more investment at screening those vehicles coming across packed with fentanyl, and also make sure that we support the Border Patrol Union that is asking for these resources.
Thank you,
and he won't support the bill.
You have 30 seconds.
Yeah. Listen, we had a secure border under President Trump. President Biden had it in his power. By the way, it's interesting, Senator Casey's talking about how I support President Trump. Senator Casey's a 99% vote with his best friend Joe Biden, which is what they've called each other. So they had the power from day one to secure the border. It was secure under President Trump. They've just taken the actions now that they should have taken, and it's a national crisis that's undermining our economic well-being, our security, our communities with this fentanyl. This was weakness. This was a liberal economic agenda that's destroying our country.
Thank you, Mr. McCormick. You do have 20 seconds.
20 seconds. Look, when I was voting year after year on investments in the border and investments in strategies that we know work, this guy was running the largest hedge fund in the world. He increased investments in China by 108,000%. After everyone knew in the world that China was cheating, China was manipulating their currency, China was undermining American workers. He did that. He also invested millions of dollars in a Chinese fentanyl company.
20 seconds, Mr. McCormick.
116,000 people died last year from fentanyl. On your watch, right? On your watch. That's 2 Vietnams. 8 years of war in Vietnam, 58,000. So the failure and those weakness, that the fact that you and Biden and Harris aren't standing up and taking accountability is a true disgrace. And the fact that you're finally taking action doesn't make the failure of action in the past any more palatable.
Thank you, Mr. McCormick. We're going to move on to our next topic.
Yes, we now turn to the topic of Puerto Rico. And I will ask the same question to each of you, starting with Mr. McCormick. Pennsylvania has the third largest Puerto Rican population outside of the island. Residents of Puerto Rico have been official U.S. citizens for over a century. Like every other working American, they have the obligation to pay federal taxes, but they don't have any votes in Congress or the right to vote for president. This November 5th, Puerto Ricans will hold a non-binding status referendum where statehood is one of the options they will vote on. Do you believe the island should decide its future? And would you vote to admit Puerto Rico as the 51st state should its people vote in favor of union?
I would not vote in favor of it being the 51st state. And listen, if Senator Casey is reelected and Kamala Harris wins the presidency and they eliminate the filibuster, which is what Senator Casey says he wants to do, you'll have 2 places that get statehood, Puerto Rico as well as Washington, D.C. You'll have additional members of justices brought on the Supreme Court. You'll have a new Green Deal beyond anything that was ever imagined. So this is tied to the filibuster, and the filibuster, in my opinion, is something that's meant as a check and balance, regardless of whatever party's in power. Senator Casey wants to eliminate that, and it's going to change the balance of power forever if the Democrats win both the presidency and the majority in the Senate. And I think that would be absolutely inconsistent with America's best interest, regardless of what party's in the majority.
Senator Casey.
Yeah, Ilya, if the people of Puerto Rico make that determination, I think we should be open to admitting them. But my opponent, of course, wanted to talk about the 60-vote rule, the so-called filibuster rule in the Senate. Let's talk about that. That is the reason that rule existing, requiring 60 votes for substantive matters, is the reason we haven't passed a background check bill for common sense gun measures to reduce the likelihood of gun violence. The #1 killer of children and teenagers. We're the only country in the world that has this problem. It's a uniquely American problem. If we change that rule, it's a rule in the Senate, it's not a statute, it's not a law, it's not in the Constitution. If we change that rule, we could pass a background check bill. If we change that rule, we could pass the Women's Health Protection Act, which would restore the protections of Roe v. Wade. If we change that rule, we could pass voting rights legislation that has broad support across the country. We could do so much to move the country forward, but he wants to hide behind that rule to block progress on substantive matters the American people want us to take action on.
30 seconds.
Yeah, we've seen what happens under a Senate majority and Biden and Harris in the White House. We know that Kamala Harris is far more left and radical in her own words than even Joe Biden. We know that Senator Casey is a sure vote, a 99% vote with Biden and Harris. And so, yeah, I believe that filibuster is a way to check the majority in either side going to extremes. That was what the Senate was designed for. And if Senator Casey really thinks that the problem for him not getting anything done is the filibuster. I think there's lots of senators who get a lot done. Senator Casey's not one of them, unfortunately.
Would you like to respond to that?
Well, just to reiterate that a lot of progress is being blocked because that rule has been a weapon to prevent progress on issues where there's overwhelming support. 85–90% of the American people want us to pass a background check bill. Gun owners, Republicans, everyone wants to pass it. It won't pass because the gun lobby has a stranglehold on a lot of members of Congress, and they also have a stranglehold on my opponent. He won't support any of those common sense measures, some of which I think we could pass with 51 votes. He won't do that because he won't stand up to the gun lobby.
Thank you, Senator.
All right, next topic, climate change and the environment. Senator Casey, several studies by physicians, by Yale University and by the University of Pittsburgh found people living near fracking sites have higher incidences of conditions ranging from nosebleeds all the way to cancer. How does your position supporting natural gas extraction in Pennsylvania impact those who believe the industry is putting their lives at risk?
Well, Matt, first of all, I think when you consider what our state's resources are, the advantages we have in Pennsylvania, that's the reason I support an all-the-above energy strategy. That includes natural gas extraction. But here's what I think the difference is between my position on allowing gas extraction, making sure we have other options like nuclear or renewable sources of energy, clean energy. We still use coal in some parts of our state for our energy base. The difference between my position and some other people's position is I support tough regulation. And that is done mostly at the state level. It's mostly depends upon who is the governor. And I think Governor Shapiro will do that kind of oversight to make sure that we can extract natural gas, but do it in compliance with our state's constitutional obligation to ensure clean air and clean water. I think that's the difference. My opponent has talked a lot about energy, but while he was a hedge fund CEO running the biggest hedge fund in the world, he was investing in Chinese oil companies and managing money for the Saudis.
Same topic, different avenue here.
Yeah.
The latest round of hurricanes served as the latest warning that the Earth's climate is not well. A storm that made landfall in Florida last month did more damage to remote mountainous communities in North Carolina. The people in Fort Washington, Montgomery County, around here, are still recovering from Hurricane Ida, which made landfall in Louisiana back in 2021. To those local people who are still cleaning up from a storm that happened 3 years ago, what should they know about your views on climate change?
Well, of the many dumb Biden-Harris-Casey policies, our energy policy is probably the worst because we've restricted our natural gas ability to export, drill, and have pipelines for natural gas with EPA mandates, with all these huge subsidies to China for lithium batteries and solar panels. So we've depressed our natural gas here in Pennsylvania when it's the key to economic growth, it's the key to national security, and it's the key to climate change. That natural gas exported around the world is how we're going to reduce global climate change, not by the Paris Accords, which basically puts constraints on us, but not India and China. It's by replacing coal-fired plants in India and China. That's why emissions in the United States are down by about 15% over the last 10 years. So we're making huge progress on this, and that's what we need to continue to do, is export our natural gas, develop our natural gas. I'm for all of the above. I'm for nuclear. I'm just not for these huge subsidies for solar and wind and electric vehicles that are driving up our dependence on China and driving up the cost of energy for everyday working families in Pennsylvania.
Senator Casey, you may rebut.
Well, what he's making reference to is legislation that allows us, through tax credits, to invest in a clean energy economy. That's creating lots of jobs all across, thousands of jobs already in Pennsylvania. Many more jobs in red states than blue states, by the way. A whole new part of our economy opening up, huge private sector investment because of those tax credits. He doesn't support that, I do. But here's the difference. While I was working on that legislation, he was running that hedge fund, investing in Chinese oil companies.
I know it's a thought, but
and managing money for Saudi oil companies.
Senator Casey's got one move. He's anti-business. He's anti-success. My career is something I'm extremely proud of. Go to CaseyLies.com to see the truth. No, what they did was they did more than tax credits. They gave huge subsidies to electric vehicles. They had EPA mandates, which are hurting manufacturing jobs in Pennsylvania, not helping. And the jobs that are created are not offsetting, and they're hurting working families. Everybody got a 20% tax increase. It's called inflation. reaching into your back pocket and stealing your money. And that hurts working families the most and seniors on fixed income.
Thank you both on that topic.
That's the result of his terrible policies.
Our time in this hour is winding down. For this next question, we will only have a 1-minute response from each of you. There will be no rebuttal. So this is just for you to speak to the voters on this question, please. We talked to the public to this topic of public safety and guns in this country. Mr. McCormick, I'll start with you. We are the only nation where firearms outnumber people. Suicides make up the majority of gun deaths. Gun homicides are down across the U.S. significantly, and here in Philadelphia compared to a year ago. However, mass shootings happen daily across the country, and many Pennsylvanians say they don't feel safe at the bus stop, at the grocery store, the synagogues, their mosque, or at school. A Muhlenberg survey found 59% of Pennsylvanians agree there needs to be more restrictions on gun access. Do you agree with the majority of Pennsylvanians that restrictions are needed, and what will you do to address this concern across the Commonwealth?
Well, unfortunately, the violence that we see, and yes, Philadelphia is down a bit this year. It's had 4 straight years of 400 murders or more. But gun violence is, for the most part, perpetrated by those holding illegal guns. The inventory of illegal guns. So if you stopped all new gun sales tomorrow, it wouldn't have much of an effect on violent crime or murders that happen as a result of that. We certainly need to do a lot more. So the things I would is the intersection of guns and mental health. We need to have appropriate risk protections where people with mental health don't have access to guns. We need to make sure we do that with due process. We need to make sure we have security in our schools, in our synagogues. Unfortunately, it requires that we do that. I'm in favor of the policy that President Trump put in place of eliminating bump stocks. But the problem you're trying to solve is not going to be solved by restricting legal gun ownership.
Lastly, in this, should rifles like AK-47s and AR-15s remain legal for purchase across this country? Is it time for renewed federal action on assault weapons?
No, I'm in favor. Those are semi-automatic rifles. I'm in favor of those not being restricted, the same rules we have now. They're used for sporting. They're used for protection. No, the Second Amendment right's a real amendment, and the Second Amendment is a real amendment, and it's a real right of the Constitution gives gun owners, and we need to protect it.
Senator Casey, your question. You changed your position from being pro-gun to wanting restrictions on gun sales and increased regulations after the deadly shootings at Sandy Hook. 12 years later, schools still are grappling with this issue. Just 3 weeks ago, a school district in Delaware County approved a weapon detection system at its middle schools. What have you done since Sandy Hook to impact real change on this issue? 1 minute.
Yeah, Sherry, there's no question about it that we can take action with regard to common sense gun measures. As I said earlier, the gun lobby has a stranglehold on one party. That meant that, it has meant, I should say, for more than a decade, that we can't pass a background check bill. We can't pass a ban on these military-style assault weapons. These common sense measures will have no impact on Second Amendment rights. It'll have no impact on law-abiding gun owners who need a gun for self-protection or want a gun to hunt. So we can do both. And that old false choice of protecting people or having common sense gun measures I don't think, holds much water. But the problem in this race is I'm willing to do that, and I'm supportive and voted for the bipartisan gun legislation, which has brought down gun deaths and has helped. My opponent won't support it because the gun lobby won't let him, and he doesn't have the political courage to stand up to the gun lobby to support those common sense measures.
Thank you, Senator, and I believe you addressed the assault weapons in your answer.
Closing statements, 90 seconds for both of you gentlemen. We start with Senator Casey.
Matt, thank you, and Sherry and Ilya for this opportunity. I want to thank the people of Pennsylvania for this opportunity to talk about this race. And every day I've been a United States Senator, I've worked on behalf of the people of our state, fighting for working families, fighting for our children every day, fighting for seniors, for people with disabilities, for our veterans, trying to work every day to advance their needs and their interests. I've also passed legislation to help families save for a disability, just like you save for college. So a young child can be the subject of and the beneficiary of a savings account. I've also passed legislation to make sure that women on college campuses are better protected from sexual assault. That's happening all across the country. They have better protections today because of my legislation. I voted for the infrastructure law that invested in every single one of our 67 counties. I've invested in legislation to bring high-speed internet to rural areas, small towns, and big cities and suburban communities. I'll continue to do that. My opponent, while I was working on all of that, was running the largest hedge fund in the world, a hedge fund that invested in China, in Chinese oil companies, a Chinese fentanyl company that produced 90% of the fentanyl in China, invested in an arms manufacturer with ties to Iran, and the weapons from that manufacturer made their way to Hamas. He's been a candidate who started this race lying about where he lives. You have the choice to make in this race between whether you're going to vote for a senator who's going to support your rights, restore those rights,
Time is up,
or a senator who won't.
Thank you. Mr. McCormick.
Yeah, when I went to West Point at the age of 17 and took an oath of duty, honor, country, America was recovering from a decade of decline. We had skyrocketing inflation. Our adversaries thought we were weak. And then we saw leadership. Ronald Reagan turned it around, and he got our country back on track. I was proud to serve him as commander-in-chief. I retired from the Army as a captain after a combat tour in Iraq, but I've never stopped serving my country. I'm a seventh-generation Pennsylvanian, born and bred. I'm a businessman. I'm a political outsider. That couldn't be more different than Senator Casey was born with a political spoon in his mouth. He doesn't know how to create jobs. He doesn't understand the devastating effect of prices on families. He is a status quo candidate. He is a weak 30-year incumbent. Bob Casey didn't change Washington. Washington changed Bob Casey. He's for amnesty, open borders, and sanctuary cities. He's voted for every spending bill that's created this enormous uptick in inflation. He wants to raise taxes on Pennsylvanians and lower taxes for rich people in California and New York. He has actually supported males competing in women's sports. Face it, Bob, you are a liberal. Bob Casey, he's been given the opportunity, and he has failed us. We need leadership that's going to shake things up, that support and fight for common sense policies, reduce inflation, secure our border, keep America safe. We need leadership that is going to change the direction of our Commonwealth and get it back on track. I'm honored to be here tonight, and I humbly ask for your vote.
Thank you, Mr. McCormick and Senator Casey. Well, this brings us to the end of our debate. We thank you and the candidates, of course, for joining us, for taking part in this, and good luck to both of you. And thank you to our viewers for watching tonight. We have put up on the screen right now a QR code, which will take you to the 6ABC elections page. There you will find tonight's debate later this evening for your viewing, as well as information on all of the 2024 races. And we hope that tonight has been helpful, and that has also been informative as you decide which candidate to cast your ballot for in November.
I'm Elia Garcia. It's been a pleasure.
And I'm Shari Williams. Thank you for watching.
And I'm Matt O'Donnell. Tuesday, November 5th, Election Day. Have a good night.
Good night.
Wednesday night.
Oh my God.
We're back. Biggest and best season yet.
Oh, no way.
John Fiona's here. What would you do?
Here we go.
So the question is,
What would you do?
You see somebody in trouble, try to help.
Can I give you a hug? Is that okay?
You have tears in your eyes.
Thank you for standing up for us.
Oh my God! Look at John!
It's what would you do? I'm on it, girl.
now on Wednesday nights on ABC.
Trick or treat!
When I flick this switch, there'll be a horrible noise and a terrible odor. Will it hurt? Pain like you've never known. Oh!
Seems risky. I am much satisfied.
What? You scared? This is happiness.
We love Halloween. Got me.
He's a bit silly.
Turning the machine off! Do you feel good? This ship is heaven. There should be no guilt on a pleasure cruise. Doctor, it's your job to keep everybody alive.
No pulse. She's in VFib. 1, 2, 3. Clear.
I have a pulse.
You're gonna be okay.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Linsey Davis. Believe it or not, we are 3 weeks until the election, and at this time, 3 weeks from now, polls will have closed in the all-important state of Pennsylvania. For both candidates, the Keystone State certainly looms large. A win there could be a big indication of just who will win the election overall. And we just saw the two candidates for Senate there face off. Senator Bob Casey and businessman Dave McCormick had a spirited debate tonight. In Pennsylvania is also where Donald Trump and Kamala Harris spent much of the day on Monday. This comes as more than 5 million Americans have already voted early, including at least 415,000 Pennsylvanians who have already mailed in ballots. And Terry Moran joins us now live. Terry, I know you were able to watch that debate. What stood out to you?
Well, it was a fierce debate. It was tough, and you can sense the closeness of this race by the intensity of that debate. Both candidates, both Dave McCormick and Senator Bob Casey, just slugging away at each other. A lot of what you might call negative attacks, because this is that close. They're trying to essentially take each other down, and in some ways, this is a race about who do you like less, incumbent politicians or hedge fund managers, right? Casey's been in the Senate a long time, since 2007, and McCormick made the most of that. And McCormick ran one of the largest hedge funds in the world, investing in places like China and a lot of, Saudi Arabia and all the rest of it. And Casey made as much of that as he could. At the end of the day, I think you heard in Bob Casey a sense that he believes he's closer to the heart of Pennsylvania, and tried to staple Dave McCormick to Donald Trump, who is also popular, but he lost the state the last time around. So I just thought it was a fierce debate, one substantive on issues that Pennsylvanians care about, but also one that got personal because it is so close. They've got to take each other down. Yeah,
it certainly was personal. Even at one point, Casey was saying, you even claim that you grew up as a farmer, and then that's not even true. But Terry, Pennsylvania, obviously, we've talked about just how critical it is, and you've often talked about just how many Americans in the middle consistently want to see politicians work together. Let's play this one interaction and get your take on the other side.
Real quick, 20 seconds. Let's say both of you were the senators of Pennsylvania. How would you work with each other? 20 seconds each.
Well, we'd have to find common ground. Right now, I don't see much with Senator Casey. I think he is increasingly, listen, Bob Casey went to the Senate to change Washington. Washington changed Bob Casey. He is completely out of step with the values and views of Pennsylvanians. He's voted for a series of things that have made our Commonwealth much worse. So I think he needs to be replaced. And that's why I'm running, because I think career politicians like Bob Casey are really hurting our great country.
I think there's plenty of things we could work together on. It should start with things that are bipartisan right now. The bipartisan border deal, supported by the Border Patrol Union. I don't know why he wouldn't support that. It doesn't make any sense. When he knows that we could advance the ball based upon the expertise of the Border Patrol. But while I was doing that bipartisan work in Pennsylvania, he was investing in our adversaries, investing in China and investing in Russia.
Let's move on to the next topic.
Well, Terry, a lot to unpack there. What do you think that Americans in the middle thought about what they heard tonight?
Well, on that question in particular, and you're right, I think Americans want pragmatic solutions to real problems. Bob Casey's problem is that he is an incumbent at a time when Americans are very dissatisfied with the status quo, especially on the Democratic side. Biden's ratings are very, very low, and McCormick tried to attach Casey to Biden. On the other hand, the first thing out of Dave McCormick's mouth is, well, there's nothing we could work on because, I don't agree with him on anything. And that's the kind of in-your-face politics that is identified with the Trump movement that I think also alienates people. So, later in the debate, they did agree that they could agree on some things around gun safety, but not much. And that's basically where we are. And it's only going to get worse because the parties are so divided ideologically in a way they weren't. Years ago, parties had liberals and conservatives, believe it or not, they had liberals and conservatives in them, in both parties, and therefore there was more room to find compromise. Not anymore. And I think that's what we saw tonight, especially with that question.
And let's take a step back and talk about Pennsylvania as a whole. You, of course, were there last night for the Trump rally and have reported on the ground in the state extensively. Both candidates have bet big on Pennsylvania. Do you think that their messages are getting through to voters, in particular those who are still undecided?
Yeah, there are undecided voters still. I'm sure there are. It is a vanishing species, however, and one that a lot of political pros will tell you, if people are undecided, announced that they're undecided at this stage of the race, it means they probably aren't that connected to politics and aren't going to vote. They just, that said, you know, this is Pennsylvania and so many of these states, just like the country, so closely divided. You know, the reason that this is closely divided is because Pennsylvanians are as split as the rest of the country, perhaps even more so. And it's the big kahuna of the battleground states, 19 electoral votes. That whoever wins Pennsylvania is almost certainly likely to win the election. And I think what people want to hear is, Pennsylvanians want to hear is, you know, do something that is going to fix the inflation that I've been dealing with, the immigration, which is a big issue as well, and won't, you know, destroy democracy and take away women's rights. And so those are issues that advantage either side, polls show, and they're divided right down the middle. So I think it's going to come down to the wire, come down to that get out the vote, and come down to, you know, the exhausting last few weeks of the campaign. The candidates are going to want to be everywhere in Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvanians are going to want to judge them and then go to the polls. We'll see what happens.
To the victor go the spoils, really is the state of play in Pennsylvania there. Terry Moran, our thanks to you as always. And joining us now to dive into the most recent polls from Pennsylvania is Nathaniel Rakich, our senior elections analyst for ABC's 538. Nathaniel, thanks for joining us. Democrat incumbent Bob Casey still in the lead, but that lead has been shrinking in recent polls.
Yeah, it has. So according to 538's latest polling average, Casey is up by about 5 points over McCormick. But over the last 2 months, that has shrunk from about a 9-point lead back in August. So Casey's been kind of flat, as you can see in the graph in front of you. But McCormick has been gaining, which, of course, is cause for concern for Democrats.
And while we're at it in the race for president, what are polls from Pennsylvania saying?
Polls in Pennsylvania in the presidential race are even closer. Harris has less than a single percentage point lead there. It's about 48% to 47%.
Tight. Why might it be that Trump in Pennsylvania is polling better than McCormick?
Yeah, so I think it comes down to name recognition at the end of the day. So obviously Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are very well-known figures in Pennsylvania. You see very few undecided voters there, with 48% in favor of Harris and 47% for Trump. Casey himself is at 48% as well. He's an incumbent senator, so it makes sense that a lot of Pennsylvanians know who he is. McCormick is kind of lagging Trump's vote share, I think because there are just a lot of Pennsylvanians who haven't made up their mind about him. And I think there is reason to expect that he can continue to grow in the polls because he has that 3-point gap between his vote share and Trump's vote share. So if he's able to close that gap, which isn't a given, this could end up being just as close of a race in the Senate as it is for president.
Obviously, when we're looking at the polls at large, everything is very close. Are there any indicators, anything that you can look at that might perhaps read the tea leaves a little bit more when you really take a deep dive into the numbers?
Unfortunately, there's just no silver bullet to these things. You know, some people will try to take a look at early voting numbers, but that can really go awry. Obviously, Democrats are known for voting early and by mail more so than Republicans, so it's not a surprise that they're voting in big numbers right now in Pennsylvania and other states. But really you just kind of have to look at the polls. And, you know, we can't predict for sure what the polls are going to look like 3 weeks from now. Maybe McCormick isn't able to close that gap, and I think that might tell us something. Maybe there are some Trump voters who won't pull the lever from McCormick because they think he's a carpetbagger or whatnot. He's kind of been slammed with that label by Casey. But, you know, I think at the end of the day, whatever the polls say on Election Day is going to be your biggest guide.
All right, Nathaniel Rakich, our thanks to you as always. And joining us now for more is Political Playbook co-author and ABC News contributor Rachel Bade. Rachel, thank you for joining us. As you just heard there, Nathaniel was showing us the polls just super tight between former President Trump and Vice President Harris. Are we seeing the same for down ballot races, or do you expect either Harris or Trump to do worse than their congressional counterparts on the ballot?
Well, it's interesting because Trump, for a long time, I mean, I've been covering Hill races for over a decade now, and we always talk about how he drags down Republicans. This race is different. He's actually pulling ahead of a lot of Republicans and helping them. And, you know, just to go back to what Nathaniel was just talking about, one interesting thing that we're seeing at the last minute here is how the map has sort of changed a little bit. I mean, I can tell you when I talk to Republican leaders in Congress and in the Senate specifically, they weren't talking about Pennsylvania earlier this year as one of those places that they thought they were most likely to flip. And so the fact that the polling has closed and tightened so much there, it's sort of making them rethink things at the last second. I mean, I can tell you originally Republican leaders were looking at places like Ohio, places that are super red, that Donald Trump is expected to carry by a wide margin, thinking that Sherrod Brown was frankly toast. And yet Sherrod Brown in their own internal polling seems to be pulling ahead of their Republican candidate, Bernie Moreno. So now they're looking more at Bob Casey thinking, okay, maybe this is a guy who we can pick off. But one thing I'll say overall, Linsey, is that Republicans and Democrats, both of them agree, maybe not on the record for Democrats, a lot of them privately will say this, that they do think the Senate is probably gone, that Republicans are very likely to flip the chamber. They only need one seat if Donald Trump wins the White House, 2 seats if Kamala Harris wins. They've already got basically a seat in the bag in West Virginia with Joe Manchin, a centrist Democrat, retiring there. They're expected to put a Republican there. John Tester in Montana, he is falling further and further behind. That's 2 right there. So at this point, it's more of a question on the margins. How many can they pick up beyond a majority?
And one big issue tonight, of course, was the issue of abortion, with David McCormick taking a line from former President Trump's playbook, saying abortion should be a, quote, state issue. Whoever controls Congress could pass a law that either enshrines reproductive rights or outlaws it. Will the energy behind abortion, do you think, ultimately decide who wins Congress?
You know, if passes prologue, yes. I mean, in recent elections, we have seen people turn out and vote with abortion on their minds, and that has very much benefited Democrats. But the thing about this cycle is that when you look at the polling, when you talk to some of these pollsters and folks who are in the focus groups actually talking to voters, the thing that is top of mind for them is actually not abortion. It's things like the economy. It's things like crime. It's things like the border. And on these issues, Donald Trump and Republicans writ large clearly have the advantage. However, in these sort of focus groups, I've heard from people that when you actually bring up abortion, it sort of lights a fire in the room for a lot of women, especially. People are very upset still about the Dobbs decision. They want to feel like they have freedom in their reproductive rights. And so to the extent that Democrats can actually keep abortion front and center, the better they will actually do in a lot of these races.
And our ABC News Ipsos polling shows a big 17-point gender gap, with Trump leading among men with 8 points and Harris leading among women with 9 points. Is this about on par with what we've seen in other elections, or is there a shift that's happening here?
Well, it depends on which pollsters you ask. So our pollster here at ABC thinks that it's basically on par with what we've seen before. But if you do talk to some others, they will point specifically to the younger aged group. If you look at younger voters, the gender gap has very much widened. And the thing about that is, you know, these voters are going to get older. If this trend continues, then the gender gap is going to be moving in an even more bigger and more extreme direction. I think the big question everyone is asking as we get very close to the election, 3 weeks now, as you said at the beginning of this segment, is who does this actually advantage? I mean, for a long time, a lot of political reporters, and myself included, analysts and such, were saying that, you know, women running away from Trump, it's really going to help Harris. And that is true. I mean, they've been repelled by Trump because of abortion, because of J.D. Vance's childless cat lady comments, because of Trump's temperament. But Donald Trump has almost given up on wooing women, and he has very much leaned into trying to target men, not just conservative men, but sort of socially liberal men, Latino men, Black men, and he's had some success with that, such that the Harris team is now worried. But one last thing I'll mention on this, Linsey, and that is if it comes to a boys versus girls election, Harris still does have the advantage. There are more women in this country, and historically they actually vote at higher rates than men, so she certainly has that going for her.
All right, well, we will see how it all plays out in 3 weeks. Rachel Bade, our thanks to you. Now I want to bring in Matt O'Donnell from our partner station WPVI in Philadelphia. Matt, I know it was a quick turnaround for you. You were just there in the debate room and now with us, so we really appreciate you joining us. Give us a sense of what stood out to you tonight.
Linsey Davis, our good friend from New Jersey, thanks so much. Great to see you. So I was sitting here with my colleagues Shari Williams and Ilya Garcia. Both candidates, David McCormick and Senator Bob Casey, left the room about 15 minutes ago, and you could feel the tension drop significantly. I mean, this is a contentious race here right now, and you know from being here in Philadelphia with the presidential debate with David Muir, this could swing the Senate one way or the other. It would be a huge pickup for Republicans because of the incumbency with the Democrats. Pennsylvania is the swingiest swing state in the history of swing states. It's just crazy. You should see the ads on our television station. It is nonstop. I don't even know if they sell cars anymore. And the presidential race, so this could be a down ballot situation. You could see a Harris victory, a Trump victory, helping one or either of these candidates, or maybe people are going to split their tickets. We just don't know. And I know you were talking to a pollster there, or talking about the poll. The race started out in the teens. Casey was way ahead. It's narrowing, and we thought that it would. I saw the Siena New York Times poll. McCormick's only down by 4 points. And so these guys, they went at each other during this 60-minute debate, contentious and at times, Linsey, personal.
Right. Yeah, we did certainly see that. And Senator Bob Casey, of course, the incumbent there, he has won every single one of his races since 2006 by at least 9 points. What do you think the possible path to victory would be for his opponent, Republican David McCormick, here?
I mean, and some would say, I mean, Republicans would say that Senator Casey never really had a race like this, one that's close. You mentioned he's won everyone pretty widely. I would have to go with the economy, and that's probably the #1 issue in every single state across the union. And I would have to give the edge to McCormick in that, just because Casey is the incumbent. Inflation's been here for 3 years now, and so McCormick has that edge where he can just blame Casey, and that was our opening question in the debate. We tried to stay on topic with things, but then things devolved, and Casey attacked McCormick for his hedge fund, and McCormick attacked Casey for trying to boss him around about the military because he is a veteran. But we tried to keep things on issue. But yeah, I mean, economy and abortion #2 by a hair, a whisker.
And you guys did do a great job of keeping them on task and on track. You mentioned some of the attacks that they had for each other there. Was there anything in particular that either said to the other that surprised you, or was this pretty much what you were expecting?
I wrote a couple down, Linsey, so I'll just read them. McCormick would look directly at Senator Casey saying this: "Face it, Bob, you are a liberal. Don't preach to me. No one flip-flop more in the Senate." Casey returns, looks at McCormick. "You are kind of like a lapdog for the Republican nominee." And both of them, over and over again, flat out looked at each other in the eye and said, "You are lying, you are lying, you are lying." The race is getting contentious.
The lapdog definitely was a memorable one.
That surprised me.
Yeah. All right, Matt O'Donnell, always a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you so much. Still much more to get to here on Prime tonight. 3 weeks after Hurricane Helene tore through the southeast, the governor of North Carolina today saying dozens still remain unaccounted for. Stay with us.
Mary J. Blige, Cher, Dave Matthews Band, Jimmy Buffett, Kool and the Gang, Dionne Warwick.
It has been amazing.
So, how do you get in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
Hey, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Foreigners waiting outside.
Foreigner? Not in the Hall of Fame?
Oh, I love Peter Frampton. I always feel like he's been far too underrated.
Getting into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. That is the ultimate goal.
Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, now streaming on Hulu.
Did you kill Mary Yoder?
Sorry. No, I did not kill Mary Yoder.
How did she die?
When the tests came back, I thought, holy, are you kidding me?
People think she's innocent. I think she's guilty.
I'm not buying this Little Miss Innocent game.
Little Miss Innocent.
I know it wasn't me. If it wasn't me, who was it?
Only on Hulu.
How many elephants have you killed? True natural beauty, one of the last of its kind. But this comes at a cost. 5 countries, 5 incredible real stories of adventure, danger,
We have to go.
and deceit. Where are we going next? We got this ongoing search for the animal we've been trying to find. These are the last lands. national parks around the world that have to be saved.
Mary J. Blige, Cher, Dave Matthews Band, Jimmy Buffett, Kool and the Gang, Dionne Warwick.
It has been amazing.
So, how do you get in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
Hey, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Foreigners waiting outside.
Foreigner, not in the Hall of Fame?
I love Peter Frampton. I always feel like he's been far too underrated.
Getting into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. That is the ultimate goal.
Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, now streaming on Hulu.
This ship is heaven. There should be no guilt on a pleasure cruise. Doctor, it's your job to keep everybody alive.
No pulse. She's in VFib. 1, 2, 3. Clear.
I have a pulse.
You're gonna be okay.
Hey, Bruce.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Do you remember what it was like not to be famous?
I do.
You have the best job in the world.
Hell yes, I do.
Sunday night on ABC. America's #1 news, ABC News, now streaming 24/7 on Disney+.
I'm Matt Rivers, traveling with the U.S. Secretary of State in Beijing, China. Wherever the story is, we'll take you there. You're streaming ABC News Live.
Welcome back. Multiple states are still dealing with the devastation from hurricanes Milton and Helene. In North Carolina, at least 92 people are still unaccounted for as the state deals with a massive misinformation campaign aimed at FEMA workers. And in Florida, there's a massive cleanup after back-to-back hurricanes hit the state. Now we're watching 2 new tropical threats. Our chief meteorologist, Ginger Z, is tracking it for us. But we begin with Victor Oquendo in St. Pete Beach.
Nearly 3 weeks after Hurricane Helene ravaged western North Carolina, tonight the governor announcing 92 people are still unaccounted for. And officials are slamming the dangerous misinformation about the federal response.
If you're participating in spreading this stuff, stop it.
FEMA back on the ground tonight, going door to door after temporarily pausing some operations due to threats. Authorities arresting an armed man over the weekend for allegedly threatening FEMA workers.
We are not going anywhere. Misinformation will not deter us from our mission of helping people, period.
And in Florida, the massive cleanup after back-to-back hurricanes. Here in St. Pete Beach, debris from Hurricanes Helene and Milton piling up, lining both sides of the street.
A rush of water like flowing out.
Andrea DeKnight sharing this video,
draining our house,
showing water pouring out of her home during Helene.
If you looked out the front window, it was just like a lake up to your house.
A long recovery ahead.
It's sad. It's a beautiful neighborhood. I'm sure it will be someday again, but it's hard to see.
Really just heartbreaking to see. Victor Oquendo joins us now. Victor, I know you're in St. Pete Beach. Give us a sense of what it's like there now.
Lindsay, there is debris all over St. Pete Beach. We've checked with neighbors. They tell me they don't even know who this boat belongs to. Debris collection, it will likely take weeks, if not months. Lindsay?
All right, Victor Oquendo for us. Thanks so much, Victor. Next tonight, there are 2 new tropical threats. Could either of them make it to the U.S. mainland? ABC's chief meteorologist Ginger Z is tracking it all for us, including the coldest air of the season for some here on the East Coast. Hey, Ginger.
Hey, and the combination of those makes a story that you'll want to hear here, Lindsay. So let's start with the 2 areas of right now disorganized thunderstorms. But the one to the east, kind of in that south central Atlantic, it's going to move west-northwestward, and it's going to move through some pretty conducive environments. So by late week, early this weekend, we could have our next named storm. It would be Nadine. But 4 to 6 degrees warmer than average, that's plenty of warmth to keep that thing fueled. But it will be fighting some other things, and that includes some wind shear. Remember from when we talked about Milton, wind shear is what kind of rips a storm apart from the top. That is what's going to keep most of everyone from Florida on up safe from this, at least for now. You see that cold front too that makes it really far south. We've got 2 things working to kind of rip that apart once it gets to the Caribbean. But again, I want everyone there to pay extra close attention to that development. Now, speaking of cold and that front, by Thursday morning, even Tampa's going to drop into the 50s, but we're talking most people by tomorrow morning have a frost or freeze advisory. So many of us east of the Rockies through the Ozarks into the Great Lakes and into southern Appalachia. So 5 to 15 degrees below average, but also we could even see a few record lows drop for places like Lexington, Kentucky by tomorrow morning. Lindsay?
Oh, it's all in the forecast there, a little bit for everybody. Ginger Z, our thanks to you. There is a manhunt for the suspect in what appears to be a workplace shooting at California's Santa Monica College. Classes have been canceled for 30,000 students across the school's 7 campuses. And it's not the first time the school has suffered a tragedy. Here's ABC's Mola Lange.
Tonight, authorities in California are searching for an employee of Santa Monica College who they say shot a coworker before going on the run.
Let's go.
The victim rushed to the hospital in critical condition around 10 p.m. Monday night outside Santa Monica College's Center for Media and Design, one of the school's satellite campuses. About 30,000 students attend the school full or part-time. Authorities closing down all 7 campuses and canceling classes as they searched for the suspect.
I guess it was a little bit scary because I had gone on a night run, literally 2 hours before, so I would pass this area. So that was a little bit concerning to hear that this morning.
Santa Monica College was rocked by a horrific mass shooting back in 2013. 23-year-old John Zahari, seen here entering the school's library before opening fire on students and staff, part of a multi-scene spree that ended with 6 dead, including the suspect.
Our thanks to Mola Lange. Survivors and the families of victims in last year's Lewiston, Maine shooting are filing an intent to sue the military. Hundreds of family members and victims allege that the U.S. military was negligent in failing to respond to multiple warning signs for Robert Card, who killed 18 people during the 2023 massacre. The group sent notices to the Department of Defense, the Army, and an Army hospital where the Army reservist was taken for a psychiatric evaluation just months before the deadly rampage. Card's medical documents indicated precipitous decline, according to attorneys for the group. There is a massive food recall for 10 million pounds of meat contaminated with listeria. The USDA recall involves hundreds of prepared items sold under about 3 dozen brand names at major stores such as Walmart, Publix, Target, and Trader Joe's. This also includes products containing chicken or turkey. Last week, the company Bruce Pack found listeria at their Oklahoma plant in nearly 5,000 tons of products. The contamination of products has affected brands range from Fresh Express to Boston Market to Jenny Craig. And that is our show for this hour. I'm Linsey Davis. Be sure to stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. Thanks so much for streaming with us.
Gentlemen, please welcome the reigning champion.